I should have left the moment I heard the music box playing. I should have called the police when I found the photographs. But when you discover that your entire life has been built on a lie, when you realize that the walls you've trusted have been keeping secrets darker than you could ever imagine, you don't run. You dig deeper. Because sometimes, the only way to move forward is to unearth the past that's been buried beneath your feet. What I found in that hidden room didn't just change my understanding of my home. It shattered everything I thought I knew about my family, my mother, and the little girl who never got to grow up. The house on Maple Street had been my grandmother's pride and joy, and when she passed away 3 months ago, she left it to me, her only granddaughter, Sarah Chen, 28 years old and recently divorced. I'd spent countless childhood summers in this old Victorian, running through its creaky hallways, hiding in its generous closets, and listening to grand stories on the wraparound porch. Now it was mine, along with all the memories embedded in its wooden floors and faded wallpaper. Moving back felt like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The floral curtains in the kitchen, the grandfather clock that chimed every hour, the smell of lavender that seemed permanently woven into the upholstery. Even the loneliness felt familiar. After my marriage to Marcus fell apart, after I discovered his affair with his colleague, I needed this place. I needed the comfort of somewhere that had always felt safe, even if that safety was just an illusion of childhood innocence. I'd been living there for 2 weeks when I decided to finally tackle the master bedroom. Gran had spent her last years in a nursing home, and the room had been untouched for nearly a decade before that. Dust covered every surface like a gray blanket, and the air was stale and heavy. I opened the windows, letting in the crisp October breeze, and began sorting through her belongings, clothes that smelled of mothballs, jewelry boxes filled with costume pearls, books with yellowed pages. It was when I moved the heavy oak wardrobe away from the wall to vacuum behind it that I noticed something odd. The wallpaper didn't line up quite right. There was a vertical seam that seemed too deliberate, too straight. I ran my fingers along it, feeling a slight depression in the plaster beneath. My heart quickened with that particular thrill of discovery that had been absent from my life for too long. I grabbed a butter knife from the kitchen and carefully worked it along the seam. The wallpaper peeled away easily, as if it had been applied recently, revealing a thin crack in the wall beneath. Not just a crack, an outline, a door frame. I pressed against different sections of the wall until I heard a soft click, and a panel swung inward on hidden hinges, releasing a breath of cold, stale air that smelled of earth and secrets. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow space. Not quite a room, more like a large closet, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet. But it wasn't empty. The first thing I saw was the music box on a small wooden shelf, its painted surface depicting a carousel with faded horses. Beside it sat a row of leather-bound journals. Below, on the floor, was a collection of items that made my breath catch: children's shoes, tiny and worn, a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, a set of alphabet blocks spelling out a name I didn't recognize, Lily, and photographs. God, so many photographs. I stepped inside, my legs shaking, and picked up the nearest photo. It showed a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with dark hair and eyes that seemed too solemn for her age. She was standing in front of this very house, holding the same stuffed rabbit that now sat at my feet. Behind her, barely visible in the frame, was a woman I recognized instantly despite the decades that separated this image from my memories. My grandmother. But she looked young, perhaps in her 30s, and her face bore an expression I'd never seen on her. Something haunted, something desperate. I grabbed another photograph. The same girl, older now, maybe 8, sitting at a piano. Another showed her in a garden, dirt on her hands, smiling genuinely for the first time in any of the pictures. There must have been 50 photographs, chronicling this child's life in fragments, moments captured and hidden away like evidence of something shameful. With trembling hands, I reached for one of the journals. The leather was soft with age, and when I opened it, I recognized my grandmother's handwriting, neater than it had been in her later years, but unmistakably hers. June 15, 1968. Today Lily asked me why the other children at church look at her strangely. She's 9 years old, and already she knows she's different. Already she can sense the whispers, the judgment. How do I explain to her that the world is cruel to those who don't fit into neat little boxes? How do I tell her that her very existence is seen as a sin by people who claim to love God? Robert says we should send her away to one of those places. He won't even say the word, asylum. He thinks I don't notice how he flinches when she rocks back and forth, how he leaves the room when she starts humming those repetitive tunes. But I see everything. I see his shame, and it breaks my heart because it means he's ashamed of our daughter, of this beautiful, strange little girl who sees the world through different eyes. I won't send her away. I won't let them lock her up and try to fix what isn't broken. But I don't know how to protect her from a world that doesn't understand. My vision blurred with tears. I had to read the entry 3 times before the words fully sank in. Lily. My grandmother had a daughter named Lily. My mother had a sister. I had an aunt I'd never known existed. I flipped through the journal, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. Entry after entry detailed a life lived in hiding. Lily couldn't go to regular school. The other children were cruel. The teachers didn't know how to handle her. She had what Gran called spells, moments when she would become overwhelmed and retreat into herself, sometimes for hours. She was brilliant with music but couldn't bear certain sounds. She could recite entire books from memory but struggled to make eye contact or understand social cues. My grandmother had been protecting an autistic daughter in an era when autism wasn't understood, when different meant defective, when families hid their imperfect children away in institutions or attics like shameful secrets. But the entry stopped abruptly in 1972. The last one was dated December 3rd. She's gone. My Lily is gone. They say she wandered off during the winter storm, that she got disoriented, and the cold took her before the search party could find her. They found her body 3 days later in the woods behind Miller's farm. Robert says it's a blessing. He actually used that word, blessing. As if losing our daughter, our beautiful girl who loved music boxes and rabbits and the way sunlight looked through colored glass, could ever be anything but devastation. I can't forgive him. I can't forgive this town. I can't forgive myself for every time I kept her hidden when she wanted to go outside, every time I prioritized the neighbor's comfort over her happiness. I built a cage of protection around her, and maybe that cage made her desperate enough to run into a storm. I've packed away her things. Robert says we need to move on, that we still have Margaret to think about. But how do you move on from losing half your heart? How do you pretend a whole person never existed? I'll keep her memory alive the only way I know how. In this room, behind this wall. The world wanted to forget Lily, wanted to pretend she was never here. But I'll remember. I'll keep every photograph, every drawing, every piece of evidence that she lived and mattered and was loved. Even if I have to love her in secret. I sank to the floor of that hidden room, surrounded by the remnants of a life deliberately erased. My mother, Margaret, had a sister who died when she was young. Did she know? Did she remember? Or had my grandmother's secret been so complete that and her own daughter forgot the sister who vanished into a winter storm? The music box sat on its shelf, silent and waiting. I reached for it with shaking hands and turned the small key on its base. The mechanism was stiff with age, but it still worked. A tinkling melody filled the small space. Claire de Lune, delicate and heartbreaking. As the music played, I noticed something else tucked behind the journals, a stack of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. I untied them carefully and began to read. They were from my grandmother to Lily, written after her death. Letters that would never be delivered, conversations that would never be had. Dear Lily, today would have been your birthday. You would have been 13. I baked your favorite cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, and I sat alone in the kitchen eating a slice pretending you were across from me, humming that song you loved. Margaret asked me who the cake was for. I told her I just felt like baking. The lie tasted worse than any truth could have. Letter after letter, year after year. My grandmother had written to her dead daughter for decades, chronicling the life Lily never got to live, the milestones she never reached. Dear Lily, Margaret got married today. You would have been her maid of honor. You would have loved her dress. It had pearl buttons down the back, the kind you always wanted to count and organize by size. I caught myself looking for you in the church, expecting to see you in the back row, rocking slightly the way you did when you were happy. She's married a good man named David Chen. I hope they'll be happy. I hope they'll have children. And God help me, I hope those children are perfect and normal. Because I don't know if I could bear watching Margaret struggle the way I did. And then, years later, dear Lily, Margaret had a baby today. A girl. She named her Sarah. When they placed that tiny baby in my arms, I saw you. Same dark hair, same serious eyes. I had to leave the room because I started crying and couldn't explain why. Sarah is perfect, absolutely perfect, and all I can think about is you and how you were perfect too, just in a way the world refused to see. I was crying openly now, tears dripping onto the aged paper. My grandmother had carried this grief her entire life, had loved and lost a daughter and then never spoke of her again, and I had known none of it. None of the pain, none of the sacrifice, none of the love that had been hidden behind a wall in a room I'd played in as a child. I spent the next several hours reading every journal, every letter, studying every photograph. Lily smiled rarely in the pictures, but when she did, it transformed her face. She was beautiful. She was real. She had existed, had loved and been loved, and then she'd been erased from family history like a mistake to be forgotten. But why? Why had my mother never mentioned her? Why had Gran taken this secret to her grave? I needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to me. I pulled out my phone and stared at my mother's contact information. We'd been distant since the divorce. She'd taken Marcus's side, had suggested that maybe if I'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have strayed. We hadn't spoken in 6 weeks. But this was bigger than our petty arguments. This was about a sister she may or may not remember, about a history that had been deliberately buried. My finger hovered over the call button. Once I made this call, once I opened this door, there would be no going back. Some secrets, once exposed, change everything. I pressed call. She answered on the 3rd ring. Sarah, is everything all right? It's late. Mom, I said, my voice rough with tears. Did you have a sister? The silence that followed was so long I thought the connection had dropped. Then I heard her breathing, sharp and quick, like she'd been running. Where are you? She asked finally, her voice strange and tight. I'm at Gran's house. My house now. Mom, I found a hidden room. There are pictures, journals, letters. Her name was Lily. Don't. The word was sharp, almost violent. Don't say that name, don't. Her voice broke. I need to come there. Don't touch anything else. Don't read anything else. I'm leaving now. Mom, it's a 4-hour drive. It's almost midnight. I'm leaving now, she repeated, and the line went dead. I sat in that hidden room surrounded by the ghost of an aunt I'd never known, and waited. The music box had wound down, its final notes fading into silence. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I picked up the stuffed rabbit, its fur matted with age, and held it against my chest. Somewhere in this house, in this room, a little girl had loved this toy. She'd held it when she was scared, probably slept with it every night. She'd been real as I was, and she deserved to be remembered. Whatever my mother had to say, whatever reason had kept this secret buried for over 50 years, I was going to make sure Lil Y's story didn't end in this hidden room. The past was about to collide with the present, and I had a feeling nothing would ever be the same again. My mother arrived at 3:47 a.m., looking 10 years older than when I'd last seen her. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing makeup, something I'd only seen during her bout with pneumonia 5 years ago. She stood in the doorway of Gran's house, her eyes scanning the familiar interior like she was seeing it for the first time, or perhaps seeing it for exactly what it was, a beautiful prison that had held a terrible secret. Where is it? She asked, not even greeting me. Upstairs, master bedroom. I led the way, my heart pounding. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't Gran? Because I asked her not to. The words stopped me on the stairs. I turned to look at her, and she met my gaze with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted. When I was 18 and about to leave for college, I asked her to never speak about Lily again. I asked her to let me pretend I'd been an only child. And she did, because she loved me, because she'd already lost one daughter and couldn't bear to lose another. We reached the master bedroom. The hidden door still stood open, the collection of memories visible in the beam of the lamp I'd set up. My mother stopped at the threshold, her hand pressed against the doorframe like she needed it for support. "I remember finding her," she said quietly. "I was 7 years old, and I remember it so clearly it still feels like yesterday. It was December, 3 days before Christmas. Everyone had been looking for Lily, the police, the neighbors, Dee and his friends with their hunting dogs. Mom was frantic, crying so hard she could barely breathe. I'd been sent to stay with the Hendersons next door, but I snuck back home. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could find her when the adults couldn't. Maybe I just wanted to feel useful." She stepped into the hidden room, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was walking through a minefield of memories. She picked up the music box, the same one I'd wound earlier, and held it carefully in both hands. She was in the woods. I saw her before anyone else did, just a small shape in the snow, wearing her blue coat, the one with the white buttons she liked to count. I ran to her, thinking maybe she was just sleeping, maybe she was okay. But she was so cold, so still. I screamed, and then everyone came running. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice remained steady, as if she'd been holding these words inside for so long that they'd calcified into something hard and permanent. The funeral was closed casket. People from town came, but they whispered. They said things like, "Probably for the best," and "She's in a better place now, and at least she won't suffer anymore." Like Lily had been suffering, like her life had been a tragedy instead of just different, difficult sometimes, yes, but she was my sister. She taught me how to play piano. She could name every bird that came to our feeder. She laughed when I told her jokes, even if she didn't always understand why they were funny. She was a person, Sarah, a whole complete person, and they talked about her like she was better off dead. I wanted to hug her, to comfort her, but something in her posture told me she needed to finish, needed to purge this story that had poisoned her for decades. After the funeral, everything changed. Dad, your grandfather, he forbade Mom from ever mentioning Lily again. He said it was unhealthy to dwell, that we needed to move forward. He packed up Lily's room, donated most of her things. I didn't know Mom had saved any of it. I thought it was all gone. She set down the music box and picked up one of the photographs, the one of Lily at the piano. I started having nightmares. I'd dream about finding her in the snow, except in the dreams, she'd open her eyes and ask me why I let her die, why I didn't save her. I was 7 years old, and I was convinced it was my fault. Mom, you were a child. I know that now. But then, I spent my entire adolescence drowning in guilt, and the only way I could survive was to pretend she'd never existed. If there was no Lily, then there was no one to save, no one to fail. So I stopped talking about her. I stopped thinking about her. I even stopped playing piano because it reminded me too much of her. She turned to face me fully, and I saw the weight of 50 years of suppressed grief in her expression. When I got pregnant with you, I was terrified. Absolutely terrified. Because autism runs in families, Sarah. The doctors asked about family history, and I lied. I said there was nothing. Because I couldn't face the possibility that you might be like Lily, that I might have to navigate the same struggles my mother did, that the world might be just as cruel to you as it was to her. Something clicked in my mind. Is that why you were always so controlling? Why everything had to be perfect? She nodded, fresh ears spilling over. I was so afraid that any deviation from normal would mean disaster. Every milestone you hit on time felt like a victory. Every social success, every good grade, every friend you made, it was proof that you were going to be okay, that you weren't going to end up like Lily. I realize now how damaging that was. I turned you into a performance of normalcy, and when your marriage fell apart, I blamed you for not performing well enough. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. I crossed the small space between us and wrapped my arms around her. She stiffened at first, then collapsed into the embrace, sobbing against my shoulder like a child. We stood there in that hidden room, surrounded by the evidence of a life lived and lost, and finally, we grieved together for the woman we'd never known and the little girl who'd never got to grow up. When her tears subsided, we sat on the floor together, and I showed her everything I'd found. We read through the journals and letters, and my mother filled in the gaps with her own memories. She loved strawberry jam, Mom said, smiling through her tears. She'd eat it on everything, toast, crackers. Once I even caught her eating it with a spoon straight from the jar, and she could draw the most incredible birds. She'd sit at the window for hours, sketching every robin and cardinal that visited. She was so talented, Sarah. She could have been an artist if she'd been given the chance. What happened that day? I asked gently. Why was she out in the storm? Mom's expression darkened. My father had a business associate visiting, this important man he was trying to impress. Lily didn't understand She needed to stay quiet, stay out of sight. She came downstairs during the meeting, humming one of her songs, and she knocked over a glass of water. It was an accident, just a simple accident. But Dad, he yelled at her. He told her she was embarrassing him, that she needed to learn to behave like a normal child. He'd never raised his voice at her like that before. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly, a gesture I'd never seen her make before, though I recognized it from Grand's descriptions of Lily. Lily ran upstairs crying. Mom tried to comfort her, but Lily locked herself in her room. A few hours later, when Mom went to check on her, she was gone. She'd climbed out the window and down the trellis. The storm had started by then, a blizzard, really. Search parties went out immediately, but in those conditions in the dark, she got disoriented. I finished softly. The coroner said she probably became overwhelmed by the wind and the snow, that she likely sat down to rest and just didn't get up again. Hypothermia. They said she wouldn't have suffered much, but I think about her out there alone and scared, and I wonder if she called for Mom, if she wanted to come home but couldn't find her way. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Mom said, after she died, Dad became different, harder. He threw himself into work, made a lot of money, bought this big house and nicer cars. It was like he was trying to build a wall of success high enough that no one would remember he'd once had a daughter who wasn't perfect. And Mom, she went along with it because what choice did she have? Women in her position, in that era, she depended on him for everything. But she never forgot, I said, gesturing to the room around us. She kept all of this. She wrote to Lily for decades. I didn't know. Mom's voice broke again. I didn't know she was still carrying this all those years she was suffering alone because I asked her to never speak about it. God, what have I done? You survived, I said firmly. You were a traumatized child, and you did what you needed to do to cope. But Mom, it's time to stop hiding. It's time to let Lily be remembered properly. She looked at me with fear in her eyes. What do you mean? I mean, we tell people. We acknowledge that she existed. We stop pretending that our family history began with you. She deserves better than to be a secret hidden behind a wall. Sarah, you don't understand. People still judge. People judge everything, I interrupted. They judged me for my divorce. They'll judge you for whatever you do. But at least if we tell the truth about Lily, we'll be choosing honesty over shame. We'll be saying that she mattered, that her life had value, that she deserved to be part of this family's story. Mom was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing the worn ear of Lily's stuffed rabbit. Finally, she said, "There's more you should know. About why I reacted so strongly to your divorce." I waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace. Marcus's colleague, the woman he had the affair with, she told you she was pregnant, didn't she? I blinked, surprised. How did you know? Because you mentioned it once in passing, and I saw how much it hurt you, the idea that he was going to have a child with her when you two had been trying for years with success. She took a deep breath. The truth is, Sarah, you weren't the problem, you never were. What are you talking about? When you were in college, you had that terrible case of appendicitis. You had emergency surgery. What I never told you was that there were complications, scarring on your fallopian tubes. The doctor told me that you'd likely have difficulty conceiving naturally. He suggested we discuss it with you when you were ready to start a family. But I couldn't, because if I told you, I'd have to acknowledge that you might never have children, and that terrified me. I stared at her in disbelief. You let me spend years thinking something was wrong with me. Marcus blamed me. We spent thousands on fertility treatments. I know, and it was wrong. But I was so afraid that if you couldn't have children, you'd feel like you'd failed somehow, like you weren't complete. The way I'd felt, for different reasons, after losing Lily. The way Mom must have felt. I wanted to protect you from that pain. You can't protect people from pain by lying to them, Mom. You just make it worse. She nodded, tears streaming down her face again. I know that now. I know I've made so many mistakes. I've let fear and shame guide my choices for so long that I forgot how to be honest. I forgot how to be vulnerable, and I've hurt you so badly in the process. I wanted to be angry. Part of me was angry, but mostly I just felt sad. Sad for my mother, who'd spent her entire life running from a trauma she'd never properly processed. Sad for my grandmother, who'd loved so fiercely but had been forced to hide that love. Sad for Lily, who'd never got the chance to know how much she mattered. We can't change the past, I said finally, but we can change what we do now. We can make sure Lily's memory is honored. We can tell the truth. We can be better. Mom looked around the hidden room, at the photographs and journals and letters, at the physical evidence of a love that had endured even in secret. What do you want to do? I'd been thinking about this since I'd found the room. I want to restore this space. Not hide it, actually restore it and make it part of the house. I want to create a memorial for Lily here, with her photographs and her drawings and her story. And I want to research her life, interview anyone who might remember her, document everything properly. People will talk, Mom warned. Let them talk. Maybe it's time someone pushed back against the stigma. Maybe it's time we said loud and clear that people like Lily deserve to be remembered and celebrated, not hidden away like shameful secrets. And what about me? What if I'm not ready for everyone to know? I took her hand. Then we'll take it slow. But Mom, keeping this secret almost destroyed you. It's been eating away at you for 50 years. Don't you think it's time to let it go? She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I'm scared. I know. I'm scared too. But I think Gran would want this. I think she'd want Lily's life to mean something beyond what was hidden in this room. We spent the rest of the night in that space, talking and crying and finally beginning to heal. Mom shared memories I'd never heard, stories of Lily's laughter, her quirks, her intelligence, her kindness. With each story, Lily became more real, more three-dimensional, less of a tragedy and more of a person. As dawn broke, sending golden light through the bedroom window and into the hidden room, we made a decision. We would tell Lily's story, not right away. Mom needed time to prepare herself to work through decades of trauma with a therapist. But eventually, we would make sure that Lily Eleanor Morrison was remembered not as a family secret, but as a beloved daughter and sister who had lived and mattered. 3 months later, I stood in what was no longer a hidden room. The wall had been rebuilt with a proper doorway, and the space had been carefully restored. Lily's photographs lined the walls, properly framed and labeled with dates and descriptions Mom had provided. Her drawings, the ones Gran had saved, were displayed in shadow boxes. The music box sat on a shelf, ready to play its gentle melody for anyone who wanted to hear it. The stuffed rabbit, professionally cleaned and preserved, rested on a small chair near the window. On the wall opposite the doorway, I'd mounted a plaque with Lily's full name, her dates, and a quote from one of Gran's letters. She saw the world through different eyes, and the world was more beautiful for it. We'd invited a small group of people to the dedication, a few remaining neighbors who remembered Lily, a representative from a local autism advocacy organization, and a journalist who specialized in disability history. Mom had been terrified, but she'd stood beside me and told Lily's story with a steady voice. My sister died 52 years ago, she'd said, and I spent most of those years pretending she'd never existed. But she did exist. She was real and complicated and wonderful and challenging. Just like any person, she deserved better than to be forgotten. And I'm sorry it took me this long to have the courage to remember her properly. There hadn't been a dry eye in the room. Now, weeks after the dedication, I stood alone in Lily's memorial room and thought about all the ways our family had changed. My mother and I talked regularly now. Real conversations, not the surface-level exchanges we'd been having for years. She'd started therapy to work through her trauma. She'd even begun playing piano again, working through the pieces Lily had taught her all those decades ago. And me? I'd started the process of exploring adoption. The fertility treatments had never worked, and knowing the full story about my medical history had actually been a relief. I wasn't broken. My body just had its limitations, and that was okay. I could build a family in other ways. I'd also started volunteering with local autism advocacy groups, using Lily's story to help educate people about acceptance and inclusion. Every time I shared her photographs, Every time I talked about her life and her death, and the way she'd been hidden away, I could see people's perspectives shifting. Some cried. Some shared their own stories of family members who'd been institutionalized or hidden. Some apologized for beliefs they'd held without questioning. Change was slow, but it was happening. I picked up the stuffed rabbit, Lily's rabbit, and held it gently. "I hope you know you're not forgotten anymore," I whispered. "I hope, wherever you are, you can feel how much you were loved, how much you are loved." The music box sat nearby, and I reached over to wind it one more time. As Claire de Lune filled the room, I thought about all the secrets that house had held, all the pain that had been locked behind that wall. But walls could be taken down, secrets could be brought into the light, and love, real, fierce, complicated love, could survive even decades of silence. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, Lily's favorite. "Wish you could hear it." I smiled and typed back, "I can hear it." I think she can too. I took one last look around the memorial room, at the life we'd brought back from obscurity, at the story we'd refused to let die. Then I turned off the light and headed downstairs, carrying Lily's memory with me. Not as a burden or a secret, but as a reminder that every person's story deserves to be told. Every life deserves to be acknowledged, and love is most powerful when we have the courage to share it openly. The house on Maple Street would always hold memories now, not just the happy ones from my childhood, but the complicated, painful, beautiful truth about a little girl who had lived and been loved in return. And that truth, finally brought into the light, was worth more than any secret had ever been. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop running from the past. Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the very things that imprison us. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to tear those walls down, we discover that what we've been hiding wasn't shame at all. It was love, waiting patiently to be set free.